It's not often a former judge who's also a former Catholic priest is prepared to make a public confession about a monumental failure during the course of his life. But Christopher Geraghty, former District Court judge, leading Catholic Church theologian and priest, has delivered such a confession in a book, Dancing with the Devil, published this week. He confesses that he was part of the cover-up of clergy abuse in the 1960s and 70s. In 120,000 words of sometimes angry prose, Geraghty, very well known in both Catholic and Sydney legal circles, denounces his former church and calls for reform. I caught up with Christopher Geraghty at his North Shore home. Christopher Geraghty, now 73, is gripped with distress at his failure, mainly through his then ignorance of the law, to expose clergy abuse of young Catholic seminarians at Springwood, where he was teaching from 1968 into the early 1970s.
Here was I at Springwood, the youngest person on the staff.
In a sometimes brutal self-assessment in his latest book, Dancing with the Devil, Geraghty describes his own seminary experience from the age of 12.
I was very committed, I was very serious, a serious little boy, and there weren't too many laughs, I've got to say, in the seminary, not too many smiles, but it was a fairly stoic existence.
He was part of a large cohort of post-war Irish Catholic seminarians. He was a competitive footballer and tennis player and was ordained a priest at 24 after 12 years of indoctrination and discipline. He enjoyed the high status of priest he'd achieved by study and devotion. He worked at Cronulla and the Northern Beaches, revered by the laity.
Young priests were very important. We felt ourselves to be very important.
By 1965, he emerged a Doctor of Divinity, a theologian, his dissertation delivered in Latin, the mother tongue of the Catholic Church. But in this memoir, published 50 years after he became a priest, Geraghty forced himself to confront his failure when, at Springwood, a young seminarian confided that he was a victim of sexual abuse by a charismatic priest, Father Vincent Kiss.
And had been having an affair with him since he was 12. And what I did with it was, looking back on it, was completely inadequate, but what I felt like, I had a pastoral duty to this person who was talking to me, and I managed to elicit a sufficient courage from him to confront Vince Kiss and to completely sever that relationship, and then I helped him leave the seminary.
Now, getting a confession from an ex-judge and an ex-priest is a big event, so I want you to read it to us.
In truth, I didn't know what to do. I was out of my depth. I didn't think of the police, of criminal offences, trials and possible jail sentences. That was to come. I realised that these foul priestly deeds had to be hushed up. The reputation of the church and of the priesthood was at stake. I suspected that this charismatic character who had gone through the system with me was some seriously ill priest, but it did not enter my head that he was also a criminal.
Geraghty says his feelings of distress were compounded when he realised that Father Vincent Kiss went on to abuse many other vulnerable children and young people. In 2002, Vincent Kiss was convicted and jailed on 13 counts of indecent assault and buggery of underage boys. This predator, Geraghty says, could have been stopped from the psychological destruction or damage of so many lives had he acted decisively at Springwood.
I'm ashamed to confess that I did not seek my visitor's permission to go straight to the rector and to the police, to expose the deceitful hypocrisy of one of my brothers and to blow his clammy relationship with a number of the young, vulnerable men of his country town out of the water.
Entitled to overseas study, Geraghty went to France and Germany for 2 years and was excited by architecture, music and literature and a more intellectual inquiry among French Catholics and theologians.
I came in contact with some of the most wonderful theologians who could ask any question, who were not threatened by any information, who were the most wonderful historians and thinkers and liberal kind of individuals.
While in Germany, he met and befriended a beautiful French language student, Adele Rodriguez. There was no physical relationship at that time. He maintained his vow of celibacy, but the two corresponded after Geraghty's return to Australia. Back home, he often found himself isolated and depressed. In 1976, asked by the Catholic Weekly to write a series of articles on the liturgy, the Church's rituals for public worship, he became outraged when he saw that, without consultation or consent, his words had been censored, made bland by his superiors. Foolishly, he threatened to sue, the dispute reported in the secular media. Told by his lawyer that he was expected by the Church to fold, he simply walked out of the Catholic Church. You're nearly 40.
I was, yeah.
Leaving the priesthood was tearful and traumatic for him. It rarely occurred then, such was the shame to Catholic families. Geraghty drove taxis and delivered meat, worked for a year as a reporter at Channel 10, and then studied law, becoming a solicitor and then a barrister, before being appointed a judge by the Greiner government in 1993. Another club, from one form of fancy dress to another, he jokes now. Adele, who'd come to Australia to work for a time, accepted his proposal of marriage. They produced 2 boys. While he personally was liberated from the Catholic Church, he says he still believes in God, acknowledges the practical great good work of the Church for the poor and downtrodden, but has always advocated its reform, an end to celibacy, married clergy, the ordination of women, all reforms rejected by the current hierarchy.
You asked me why the Church hasn't embraced it. I mean, I would have thought that the whole world knows why the Church hasn't embraced it. It's because the Church is ruled by old men. And it's a question of power. It's a question of keeping everybody in their boxes.
The Church is about authority, isn't it? It's about the certainty which comes with that authority, and certainty is very attractive to a lot of people.
The Church isn't about authority. The Church is about a message and a way of life. It's about freedom, it's about grace, it's about transcendence, it's about belief. And it's time for those in authority to surrender some of their authority and liberate their people.